On a Friday evening this week, a cabinet secretary sent one letter, and by midnight, two of the most capable AI models in the world were gone for every user on the planet. Not hacked, not glitching, just gone, by order of the US government. The company that built them, Anthropic, received that letter at 5:21 p.m. Eastern Time and had both models suspended before the night was over. They complied. They said publicly they disagreed with the action, and then they turned off the lights. What I want to sit with tonight isn't the drama of it, though there's plenty of that. It's the underlying question that the drama is kind of obscuring. Does the legal authority the government invoked actually cover this? And if it does, what does that mean for every AI model deployed after this one? Because this isn't just a story about Anthropic. It's about whether the executive branch now has a practical kill switch over deployed AI systems, and whether any law, court, or institution is in a position to say otherwise. So let's back up and establish what we actually know about these models, because the context matters before we can evaluate what the government did. Fable 5 and Mythos 5 are Anthropic's latest frontier models. They were released to the public on June 9th, 3 days before the directive arrived. And Mythos in particular wasn't a general-purpose chatbot. It was purpose-built to find software vulnerabilities, the kind of work that security researchers and companies do manually at enormous cost. Mozilla used a preview version of Mythos to find and patch 271 security vulnerabilities in Firefox. That's not a trivial capability, and nobody in the industry was pretending otherwise. The U.S. Treasury Secretary and the Federal Reserve Chair had already convened financial industry executives before the public launch to warn them about what Mythos could do, and major banks were already testing it. So this is a model that had cleared thousands of hours of red teaming with the U.S. government itself, the UK AI Security Institute, and third-party organizations. No universal jailbreak was found in any of that testing. Anthropic had also implemented a 30-day data retention policy on Fable interactions, which suggests they were already building compliance infrastructure into the product's architecture before the directive ever arrived. The tension here didn't come out of nowhere. The Trump administration had actually tried, before the public launch, to persuade Anthropic to delay the release. That effort failed, and then, 3 days after launch, the directive came. Here's where the legal story gets genuinely interesting and honestly a little strange. The Commerce Department's letter required a license for, and I'm quoting directly here, the export, re-export, or domestic transfers of the Anthropic models. That language comes from the Export Administration Regulations, the EAR, which is the primary body of U.S. export control law. The specific doctrine being invoked is called deemed export. The idea behind deemed export is that if you share controlled technology with a foreign national on U.S. soil, that's legally equivalent to physically shipping the technology overseas. It was designed for hardware, for physical goods, for discrete technology transfers. The government is now applying it to an API, to a software service that streams responses to users in real time. And here's the regulatory gap that makes this especially murky. The Biden administration's January 2025 AI diffusion framework had actually tried to build a proper legal scaffold for exactly this kind of situation. It created a specific export control classification, number 4E091, for closed-weight AI model weights trained on more than 10 to the 26th computational operations, a real category tailored to the product. The Trump administration rescinded that framework on May 13, 2025, saying its stifled innovation was overly complex and undermined U.S. diplomatic relations. Nothing replaced it. So, when the Commerce Department sent its letter to Anthropic on June 12, 2026, there was no specific codified regulatory classification governing deployed AI model API access. The government was applying residual EAR authority to a product category the current regulations were never written to address. That's not a technicality. That's the whole legal question. Whether the statute's existing language, designed for hardware and discrete data transfers, can be stretched to cover the real-time suspension of a commercial software service used by hundreds of millions of people, and whether that stretch was executed with anything like due process. Now let me give the government's position its real due, because I think it's easy to read this story as a straightforward overreach and miss the legitimate concern underneath it. Mythos was genuinely designed to find software vulnerabilities at a scale and speed that no human team can match. The administration's stated concern, according to a report citing an administration official who spoke to Axios, was that a rival company had claimed to jailbreak Mythos, raising possible national security risks. And the capability at the center of this isn't trivial. A model that can read a code base and find exploitable flaws at Mythos's level of performance in the hands of a foreign adversary's intelligence services is a real concern worth taking seriously. The Treasury Secretary and the Federal Reserve Chair thought it was serious enough to brief bank executives before the model even launched. So the government isn't inventing the risk category from whole cloth. Vulnerability discovery AI is genuinely dual-use technology, and the people who wrote export control law had dual-use technology in mind when they wrote it. The legal stretch isn't obviously absurd on its face. And the administration has a reasonable argument that waiting for a comprehensive new regulatory framework to be written and codified before acting on a live national security concern isn't always operationally possible. I can follow that argument. I just don't think it survives contact with the actual facts of what triggered this particular directive. Because here's what the facts actually show. Anthropic reviewed the jailbreak demonstration and found a small number of previously known minor vulnerabilities that appeared relatively simple. The technique, as Anthropic described it, basically consisted of asking the model to read a specific code base and fix any software flaws. That's not an exotic bypass of core safety systems, and Anthropic's architecture separates its strongest protections against the most dangerous outputs from the conversational model itself, running them through independent classifier systems. The jailbreak didn't touch those. More importantly, Anthropic pointed out that other publicly available models, including OpenAI's GPT 5.5, can discover similar vulnerabilities without requiring any bypass at all. So the exclusive risk argument, the idea that Mythos uniquely enables something adversaries couldn't do otherwise, doesn't hold up given the competitive landscape. The government provided only verbal evidence of the jailbreak, not a formal written technical assessment. No Federal Register notice preceded the action. There was no disclosed administrative review process, no pre-deprivation hearing, and no clear appeal pathway. Anthropic called the directive based on a misunderstanding and pledged to seek restoration of access, but it complied the same night, and the models went dark for every user worldwide. Anthropic itself made the structural point clearly. Applying this triggered recall standard across the industry would essentially halt all new model deployments for every frontier AI provider. My read on where this leaves us is that the government may have a plausible legal argument that the EAR's existing language technically reaches deployed AI software, but that argument has never been tested in court. It's being applied without a regulatory framework tailored to the product. It was executed without meaningful due process, and the specific justification offered doesn't appear proportionate to the scope of disruption imposed. That's not me saying the directive was illegal. The question of legality is genuinely unresolved, and I think it probably stays that way unless Anthropic litigates it, which they haven't indicated they'll do. But the precedent it sets doesn't wait for the courts to catch up. So here's what I'd actually watch for in the weeks ahead, because there are a few concrete things that will tell us whether this is a one-off or the beginning of a pattern. First, watch whether Anthropic pursues formal administrative or judicial review to challenge the directive. They've said they believe it was a misunderstanding and that they want access restored, but there's a real difference between negotiating quietly and putting the legal question on the record. If they file, that's the story. Second, watch whether Congress moves to either codify or constrain the executive authority being used here. What happened on June 12th happened in a regulatory vacuum, specifically because a framework that would have clarified these rules was rescinded 14 months earlier. Filling that vacuum is a legislative job, not a regulatory one, and it hasn't started yet as far as we know. And third, watch what the rest of the industry does with its next model release. If other developers start quietly downgrading capabilities or restricting deployment before launch to avoid a similar directive, that's a chilling effect that'll be hard to measure but easy to feel in the product decisions coming out of the next 6 months. I'm not sure this directive was illegal. I'm not sure it was legal. What I'm pretty sure of is that it was applied without a framework adequate to the question it was trying to answer, and that the precedent it leaves behind is considerably larger than the jailbreak that triggered it. That's your evening context. See you tomorrow.